thank you so much, Daniel, for coming, for inviting me, and also amazing presentation before. Now I'm getting very nervous because I feel like, wow, you did such great jobs, and I'm like, I'm gonna come with my lousy little social media images. But I feel like, basically, I was like, oh my God, I'm being asked here, and I was like, I didn't know what to do. And then, of course, the Be Real notification came in. I was like, okay, I need to make a presentation now. I was like, oh, okay, of course, Be Real has to be present. I was like, and then it came to me, I was like, okay, I have to talk about images because I feel like the bodies we have, I feel like it was like, to me, like, it's quite present, but also what I find more interesting is the mediation of the bodies or the fashion you have or the things. So I was like, oh, it's all for me about the sort of like the mediation of like user-generated humans. So basically, how do we in our bedrooms do it or in our streets? And I feel like also this is kind of the core sort of like found things which I deal with. So basically, I really love like sort of how economies work of images. So like how can you make something viral and not viral, and what is the point, and how do you deal with all these things, and sort of like what is sort of like this economy of images. So in my practice, so I usually I'm a fine artist, so here's one installation I've done just recently, and there I looked into sort of this idea of like sort of the vibe shift and sort of like this new type of like sort of like imagery that we kind of have now established after sort of like this, like with the, just like the trend of the vibe shift. And then sort of like I kind of sort of created also another image sort of about like sort of that was kind of related to, so this came out. So I'm truly more of like sort of like fine artist in this sense. And then also here, this is my degree show, I think like 1 year ago, where I presented sort of like installation where it was all about sort of like what would be the new future of like communities and like bodies, and how would that relate. And here something similar, we like basically kind of copied Martin Schöller, and this was supposed to be sort of this idea of like being like a token or like this new identity, like of joining a community, and also how this sort of like even failed as a concept. But I'm just like quickly skimming on sort of like what I do, so we can come to the proper sort of presentation part. And then sort of here again, like I also have like another sculpture that I created where it was all about sort of like an online performance I conducted on Instagram over like multiple years, basically creating this like narrative of a fictional character. So this was sort of like an Instagram post I like did at the time. And also this is what led me to my position now at Balenciaga, which is sort of like, since sort of 2020, I actively consult on all sort of like images that people would create. So like I'm like in every single sort of meeting when it comes to what can people make as image, and how can we mediatize this image, and how can it work. And here this is like the campaign, this is the lockdown campaign, so something similar to the Martine Rose one. I feel like we just like on the left, or you? Oh no, I'm not sure, whatever. Where it says Balenciaga, so this is Martina. She's chief creative officer of Balenciaga, and we just photographed her at home, and then Andu, who's on the other side, and he was just supposed to be at home, bored, and like just like not knowing what to do, but wearing the new Balenciaga clothes. And basically, all of these projects, kind of to me, are sort of like about image making in a sort of like a new way, because, or like in a, like not new way, but like in a like understanding images sort of in a new context. So, and now I'm just like thinking like, what are images today? Like sort of like, how do we define images, and like how can we generate new images, or like what are the key sort of like specificities of these? So of course here, images are no longer sort of like normal, or like it's no longer related to a camera. I feel like it's like sort of this idea of a network thing. And then I was like, Daniel is like the key example of sort of like a great network teacher who does all of this. Like I found this footage, and I was like, he's on social media, like the, yeah, like literally, like Yes, like the social media is like it's constantly like, I mean, there's like a media aspect to it, like being aware, like being in touch, like being sort of like in totally things, and sort of like that is an image in itself. Sort of like the way we present ourselves can be an image, like in a way, in a public relation sense, but also a screenshot. So it's no longer even we need to make images in a sense where, okay, a photograph, but if we take a screenshot, that equally can be an image. And what you previously said also, how could it be interesting when, like, with like sort of GAN software, like who is the author of this? Is this an image? Is this a photograph? And I feel artists such as Seth Price or like even Apple sort of, they generate all their product images. So, but is it an image? Is it an animation? And I feel like all these things sort of all are kind of now post photography. So I feel like this is sort of like a class of like sort of assets that like similar to content and sort of like things that are just like images that are like just no longer relying on a camera, but they can be made by anyone at any scale using any type of tool. And sort of like our feed is an image, and if you take a screenshot, it's all sort of image. If we like create sort of like a tweet, we take a screenshot of the tweet, it can be an image. So I feel like there also, I feel like you mentioned it before, Jack Self, Stella, sort of like furious and sort of like very on it, and like he kind of described it as the big flat now, sort of like where everything right now is sort of like the content and sort of like at the same democratic playing level. So where like it's no longer like sort of like matters. And I feel in that sense the internet is this sort of like new way of like dealing with sort of like content basically, which I feel like everyone here I feel like kind of is aware and knows that like content can be anything, right? So there I was like, okay, this was I feel like very crucial point. And then I feel this is also a work I've done basically where we have the potential to go viral at any point. So it can be like at any location, at any sort of point, or sort of like in any way or form we can do it. And of course, it is sort of Hito Stahl, who was in the first video. She really is like kind of sort of also the queen of like circulation and sort of understanding the circulation. And I feel like it's really kind of interesting to see which images sort of travel on like, and then sort of like coming it back a bit like sort of like this idea of like sort of, okay, an image circulates and sort of like we have it and anyone can go viral, but actually not everyone can go viral, right? So like I feel it's not, if I make a picture now, everyone will go viral. But sort of like, and then I feel like here Bourdieu, I mean, I'm like not like at all like a theory queen, but like basically he kind of sort of like very like poignantly understands sort of like there's multiple types of capital, sort of like we have the economic capital, which kind of everyone kind of is aware of, like how much money you have, but also how cool you are, sort of that sort of, or like how much like education you had. So all the sort of like symbolic sort of like values that you can generate that will create more hype and sort of like things. And then again, we have sort of, and this R is sort of like symbolic capital that kind of like creates this sort of thing. And then, and then we have this sort of like the body or sort of the human that kind of creates sort of like a, like he calls it habitus, but like basically it makes it sort of like this like thing that deals with all these different types of capital, and then you can engage with them in whatever fields. And I feel like that's sort of like mechanism, which I feel like, I don't know, this was like in the like, I don't know, pre-internet. Basically, I feel like is how the internet also really works. Like I feel like you cannot just be like, let's say, you like it doesn't matter, like it matters your symbolic capital and understanding. Are you with it? Are you with the youth? Are you with the sort of like things, or are you with the sort of like classical like thing, depending on the things? So, for example, like here, Balenciaga, this is also how we sort of like started working together. Is basically I did this sort of like images, and like I was basically a student. I was there like literally a student here, and I literally was like in this class. I was sitting there and I was like, oh my god, I need to like sort of like do images, and I had like zero capital in any way. And I was like, I just have to go for it. And then I was like, okay, well, I created all these like lol images online, and like at the time I couldn't pinpoint what it was. And then Demna like started following me on Instagram, and he was like, oh my god, yeah, like that works. And then it developed into this now like now well-known field where everything is casual, sort of like organic content or user-generated content to be used on the feeds. And what is kind of interesting, again, like tying this in, like this shift, I feel like is very much related to sort of like this idea of being singular. And this idea of like being like sort of like culture capital and sort of like even like brands, they need to be singular. They need to understand the current sort of zeitgeist. And there, a German sort of like sociologist, he really is like great in sort of like understanding this field. And he like wrote this like great book, which is called The Society of Singularities. And he really understands sort of like what makes the contemporary sort of like culture, if we see image making and bodies formed by culture, like how does that function and how does it work? And basically he says like anything right now should be unique or individual, or sort of like the drive to be like sort of in this like, we have this sort of like modernist idea where everything should be standardized, like the most efficient. But now I think it's cool and quirky to have like a organic content on Balenciaga. It feels like it at the time was like, oh yeah, it was unique or special. And there also is, I feel like, this sort of like new sort of shift, and sort of this like is all Andreas Reckwit's sort of like work, where on one hand we aim at sort of like cultural purity, which means sort of like it's cultural purity, and the other hand we have cultural remix. And with this sort of field of cultural remix, the notions are like sort of like, we live in cities, we have sort of maybe like a Buddhist sort of like yoga session in the morning, we go for like Italian sort of pasta in the midday, then we go sort of watch a sci-fi movie and sort of go to, I don't know, like basically somewhere in LA and watch a live stream from, I don't know, the latest Art Singapore, Free Singapore. So I feel like it's like this idea of like cultural remix. So we kind of really like value sort of like the remixing. And the opposite to it is sort of like this idea of like, no, this went too far. Sort of like we no longer want this sort of like binary between gender and sort of like women or male, whatever. Like it should be like, or non-binary or whatever. It should be like going sort of like going into this sort of like puritanical form. And I feel like that, Andreas Reckwit says, is like the newest form of sort of like culture, and like, but with both, whatever your political stance is, it's like they highly value culture. So like for both, it is important, whether it's like sort of like both value culture more than financial capital. So in both of this, it's important how your flat looks. Is it an IKEA furniture? Has everyone done it? Or is it like a new one-off, like, I don't know, Konstantin Gricic chair that like, I don't know, or whatever furniture you could desire, like something like this, for example. Like how would you position yourself? And I feel like understanding this level, I think, is also crucial to understand sort of like images. And then of course we have sort of like now this like fight between sort of like culture purity and wanting to like be like standardized, and sort of going back, and images should be like clear, like it's no longer like in the speak flat now, what I previously mentioned, that's remix, right? Like everything is like, all of a sudden the artworks are like images, and tweet can be images, and that is like overwhelming to people. People are like, it can be like leading to this like idea of wanting to be pure, like culture pure. And then I feel like this is sort of like now like understanding this entire problem of like sort of like the contemporary culture and sort of like how it involves sort of image making. So I feel like, yeah, I mean, as we say, like I said, this most common things, everything on social media is fake, and like it's like everything is staged and scenarioed, and like I feel like we all know it's like sort of like not like really that great, and sort of like everyone knows it's fake. No one trusts influencers anymore, and like you like are like bored by them or like whatever, or like it feels also like it's like this idea of like constantly having to stage and perform for this platform, basically, which is sort of like sort of dismay. It's like sort of this constant idea and struggle that like right now I should not live in the moment because I could use this for a future job opportunity, because if I would take a selfie right now and say, oh, look, I'm with all these cool people and they're all listen, like that would give me another job and I could put it on my social media where I'm friends with all the people, blah, blah, blah. You know the deal, like everyone knows it right now. So I feel like, wow, like it's this constant like struggle of like commodification of everything, right? So like it's like and also like that's like a true sort of like problem right now. I feel like where are the lines? How do we mediate our bodies constantly? And then I mean also, as like Daniel said before, it's sort of like this sort of like Mackenzie work really brilliantly like put together this idea of like that there's this new type of sort of like struggles and class systems in place right now for this type of information makers, this type of people that produce information and the people that own information. And there, she says that sort of like, there's like this sort of like Victorialist class and the hacker class. I feel like, I mean, she's quite aware that these terms are quite like random, but like I feel like it can be very like helpful to understand this. Right now within capital, there's like one like she mentions that farming and being in a is still like a very original sort of like capital nest, and then there's a sort of like nest of like the Marxist sort of like being in the factory and the factory owners and who has the machines. But I feel like right now, I feel like what is like I think very much apparent, like it's like where are the struggles in this contemporary sort of image making where everything is image, like your entire persona is image, like your entire like world is image, and like and you kind of need to upkeep this. And then she basically like says that like sort of like the hacker class has to like reinvent information over and over again, sort of like. And then there's like sort of like this idea of like being like very like sort of like producers and like not even knowing what the brief is, and sort of what is the new social media, what is like, can you come up with a new concept for Be Real or like whatever, it's like the new I mean, I don't know what will be in 4 months, like no one knows, right? Like everyone has to shift to TikTok or like all these like other platforms. And then on the other hand, there's sort of like this Victorialist sort of like class that like kind of like owns all the IP or the infrastructure, all these things. Like I feel like, and sort of like is aware. And I feel like there, for example, Balenciaga is a great example. It can be anything at any moment, sort of like, and the ownership is sort of like quite like centralized. And I feel like they just make people work. And I feel like it's kind of like a very like it can be sort of like a very sort of like contemporary struggle. And I feel like it's very aware. And I feel like, yeah, everything is fake. And like, I feel like describing this entire problem of like everything is fake and sort of like almost like you could give up now and be like, okay, everything is fake, goodbye. I'm gonna like, boop, go back and like no longer deal with it. But I'm like, kind of feel like it's like a bit to me boring. Because I feel like, yeah, we could all cry now and like be like, it's like fine. And like, I mean, like captures realism and all these things. And like, there's all these problems, not to neglect the problems, but like, what if we just go for it? Like, what if we accelerate image making? What if we like make it even more intense? And sort of like, this is kind of what I'm like trying to like establish now, sort of like, what would be sort of like a new way to like, or like accelerate what is like in a world where like sort of like sort of we are given these like scenarios where you have to do this, like how do we deal with this? I feel like sort of Rata came out last year with this like big book of like her struggles and like sort of like how she has been like her body and her image has always been misused, and sort of like she came out with this memoir. And I feel like regardless of the content of this book, what I feel like was striking was the storytelling. And like, I mean, what is the storytelling in this? I feel it's like that she describes like people that everyone kind of knows and sort of like has a sort of expose. But like, what if we sort of like just like push it and sort of like go fully for this auto-fiction route and really like we know if everything is fake, okay, well, then let's tell great stories and really go for this idea of like auto-fiction and content narration, like a narration of images and sort of like narratives. And I feel like, yeah, I'm like very much like in any sort of like method, I'm always thinking, how can you fictionalize this? How can you create this narrative string between all these things together? And I feel like, how could you do this in like a creative or like interesting way that could be applicable for any sort of person or like things? So yeah, here I'm like definitely into, so I feel like definitely it's like storytelling and sort of like these words. And there's like so many ways I feel like also like with any type of image, like, or like networked image, like post-photographic image, it's a key point. It's like, how do you tell the story and in which way? Like, it can be very conceptual and like quite alienating, and that's also storytelling. It can be very banal or like sort of like simple. And I feel like this idea of like that sequencing things together in sort of the big flat now is the most sort of like, I feel like compelling sort of narrative I could imagine. And also I find interesting and like sort of like, how do you do this? How would you tell new stories? How would you tell new sort of like experiences? And I feel like, yeah, I took this like random Google image that I just found. And now I just wanted to go into some contemporary examples that I feel like at any scale, I feel like had like some type of compelling like story that I feel like worked in sort of things. And like, yeah, so of course we have this sort of Balenciaga Simpson show, which I feel like it was like, what I think was the most interesting about this was what people did with themselves. Like sort of like, it was in Châtelet, which is sort of like a famous theater in Paris. It's the one in the back. And basically people just got invited and no one knew like what's gonna happen. It was just also called the event. And I feel like, especially with this type of projects, usually I feel like the vocabulary is not there in terms of like, is this a fashion show or not? Or like, would this be for anyone, or like no one knows really. So basically every single guest just like got invited, and then they were like forced, like there was no other way. You had to be like, also like, it was forced to go through the red carpet. And basically this event was then live streamed to the people in the theater. And so everyone, like it's like Châtelet is like a huge like classical theater. So people were arriving and like got to their seats, but they had to go through this like red tunnel and entering the things, and it was live streamed. And then also everyone was confused who now was like on display and not, and everyone did content. Basically, I feel like everyone was like, it now became like this thing. It's like sort of like they're like understanding it, and like sort of like even like almost like it was like the live stream was like one thing, and like I think people definitely watched it, but like what was more interesting is that you can tell I took a selfie and then posted immediately to Instagram, and then Christy, no, I mean, I don't know, the Selling Sunset Queen, she came and she was like, oh my God, ah! And like, I mean, how people behave is, I think, the most interesting in this context. Also, when we do look into media and images, it is that content, I feel, that drives a lot of this type of image making. But I mean, of course, this is now like very sort of like high, like sort of like probably like high production value and scale. And then I feel like she's very young, Laura Andrashko, she did this event, like it was kind of similar. And basically it was like, so she, again, is part of the Vibe Shift, and she was like sort of like making these like 2012 photo shoot images, and sort of looked basically in her own history, because she's like, I don't know, she grew up with all this type of like image making and sort of like nylon and sort of blogging, and it's sort of rediscovering blogging, because like right now we come to a cycle where this is vintage, and like you can look into Pinterest and you find all these iconic things that are so vintage. So basically, and like she's really like, she just graduated from St. Martin's, and like she just basically rented this like fake gallery place. And she told everyone it's going to be an art opening, and it's going to be like things, but there was no art on show. So basically it was somewhere in Central. It was an empty space. And then the models like were just like having a photo shoot, and they were dancing and they were engaging with this sort of like with the audience, and like again, no one knew who was in charge and what was the image making process in a world where everything is image. But like you knew that when you entered this space, like it was like sort of like performative, and I feel like it was very interesting to look and feel this, and like it was a live photo shoot happening, and then it was like you were like as a, I guess, user or like as a visitor asked like, do I take images of the photo shoot, do I take images of the model, or do I take images of the screen, and like it's all live, do I take a selfie within this? And this was, I feel like, kind of interesting to me how this worked. So I feel like it was a very compelling example of like using the same mechanism but at a much lower sort of scale in terms of like being young and like not having all the resources. Again, of course, the Balenciaga show, I feel, again, it's like about like making the user-generated content and like giving access people to the set so they can go and to them. I wish I had the video actually, but I was like too inadequate to insert videos in there, and I was like, I didn't download my TikToks. But like basically what I think was funny is like that like then after the show everyone was allowed to go into the snow, and like everyone could feel the snow, and like you could make the things, and like it was really like compelling. Again, like the runway images are one thing and the live stream is one thing, but what I think like drives the narrative a lot of times with this type of shows is what people do themselves, and how do you sort of like manufacture this, even how do you make people do this, and also like they want to do it. Like I mean, we all been in these situations where it was like a forced like memification and sort of like memification, and like you tried to like everyone knew like you were supposed to take an image, but like I feel like it was not compelling enough. But how do you do it organically? And then again, also I feel like more sort of like, I think what I think is interesting, sort of these traditions are more sort of in the fine art world present. And I feel like Anna Imhoff is, of course, like I feel like such genius at orchestrating like user-generated images, and like almost like it's one thing to again have the press images, the empty space, like even like at the time it was locked down, so it was an empty space, but I think what's really truly like impactful was when all the people were there, when you all of the sudden had to shovel these people, the performers had to deal with the audience, the performers had to like engage with everything, and everything was so like brilliantly photogenic and sort of like kind of also like insightful, and I feel like it was very much like sort of quite a compelling way again to like deal with affect, and sort of like again like the audience is the key participant and sort of like driver of the image making content rather than the centralized image, sort of like the, let's say what other people like a centralized image, yeah. And then again I feel like also a great example is because again like like when the Balenciaga couture show happened and it was announced that all the celebrity was like, again, it was like, then it was funny how they like just exited the fitting and everyone knew it would happen, and like it went to Daily Mail and like everything, and like it's like, it was understood that something was happening, and I feel like something like Victoria's Secret have done this very well like before. I mean, I'm only talking about now media images, like not in terms of like what they stand for, but like they've done it also so well. It was always like this, like they went for a fitting and everyone knew, and then there was like this 2 shots between door and car, what everyone like went for. And I feel like there's millions of like images who have like Kim K, Dua Lipa, even the models all leaving the couture store, and like almost these images kind of circulated in a different economy. They circulated in the sort of like newspaper Daily Mail thing, where all of a sudden my grandma would be like, she now knows Balenciaga. She like, when I started working there, she was like, I don't know what this brand is, like it feels like random, like I hope you're doing well. It's like it's like it seems not legit. And then now she's like, yeah, I think I've seen these people, I've seen these images. And I feel like again like trying to reach out to like multiple audience at the same time, with also minimum, like sort of like letting people do what they want to do. Like it's paparazzis doing these images. Like it's just like being aware how social sort of like fields or like the habitus of like people, how do they engage with this economy, like this, like that they need to have this, like, yeah. And again, like another one which I think was like the Yeezy campaign or whatever, what I think also was like a genius approach of like starting with Kim K and sort of like North and sort of all these sort of like people, like the A-list celebrities, and then forcing everyone to take the same image until it reached your local like micro-influencer so that everyone knew. And like this, again, the scale from like high, like unreachable to extremely reachable. Like this, like, I don't know, like people might been friends with this person. I'm sure the team was very aware to get the most micro influencers or whatever they're called to do it, because like that then became like this sort of like from sort of a macro to micro, and sort of like being really forcing everyone to do the same, being quite democratic, being understanding, sort of like everyone had to go to the space, they got one iPad and they had to do the same thing over and over again. And like it's just like you almost force them to conform, and because they conformed, it was more funny because like it is the same image over and over again. And then, but of course, like here, like this works once and then you need to move on, which again, we come into this idea of like, how do you constantly reinvent images? How do you look into sort of like what could make an image? And I feel like, yeah, so I feel like, thank you.